Good morning. I'm Fred Kambach, Managing Editor at The Advocate. Welcome to our Mid-Year Economic Outlook Summit. We've got four panelists with us today, virtually, of course, not in person, to discuss the economic impact of the coronavirus and what lies ahead for the Baton Rouge area economy. We'll start with a presentation that will drive home the effects of COVID on businesses and the commerce in the area, and then move our discussion to our panel discussion with questions from the public and also from our business staff. But before we go any further, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Hancock Whitney Bank, who made this event possible. First up is Adam Knapp, President and CEO of the Baton Rouge Area Chamber, which leads economic development for the 9-parish capital region. Adam's going to give us a snapshot of economic activity since the outbreak of COVID earlier this year. Many of you may be familiar with his presentation on the local economy. He's very good at packing a lot of information into a concise report, and it's very easy to understand. So, Adam, if you could share your screen with us, we'll get started.
You got it, Fred. Can you see it?
I got you, and there's your screen. There you go. All right.
Great. Well, thank you for having us on. I want to give you about 5 to 10 minutes of economic slides to try to drive home what you just shared, Fred, about the state of the area economy and a little bit of the work that we're doing through this period. These slides will be available. We'll release them later today. So if you want to have an opportunity to look at them again, pore over them, or ask us questions, feel free to follow up afterwards. Everything that we're doing during the pandemic has been hosted at our portal for information on the recovery, www.brac.org/recovery. So all of this information is there, and we're updating it daily with new information about our work as well as what we see happening in the recovery, information that's useful, we think, to business owners through this period, as well as employees and the general public. What we've been trying to do each week, if you've been following this, is to give a weekly set of data indicators on the pace of recovery, facts, as much as we can find them, of information that you can glean on a weekly basis, which is not as easy as it might seem. That information is typically not coming out, but monthly from the federal government. So we've been able to track down a few indicators that can be found on a weekly basis, including some data from commercially available sources, freely available sources, academia, and as well as the federal government, as well as some of our area investors who have been sending us data. So we're going to go through some of those slides for you. And then I'll end with a little bit about our work. The first slide I wanted to show is about the pace of our kind of decline. We wanted to put it in the context of what many of us will remember was the Great Recession and the impact. So we wanted to show in this slide what the Great Recession looked like in terms of non-farm jobs. So this blue line is the total number of non-farm jobs. You can see the numbers going up the right-hand side. 340 is 340,000 jobs, all the way up as high as 420,000 jobs, 430,000 jobs. This is how many we have seen in the metro area over the period of time that we're looking at. During the Great Recession, we had declined to about 360,000 jobs, rose to about 400, almost 420,000 jobs as we were pre-pandemic. And you can see we erased a decade of job growth in a month, essentially, with what happened back in March. You can see it most starkly with that number. What I want to highlight for you, as the headline indicates, at our bottom in April, we were down about 13% from our pre-pandemic levels. In the Great Recession, we were only down about 6%, a little bit more than that. So you can see just how dramatic a difference it is for what's been happening in this current period. You can see that slight tick upwards, although the month on the bottom says May. That's actually trending toward the June data that's come in, showing a slight recovery in April and May and June, but still down quite dramatically. You also can see that in the 2016 flood, just how small it was relative to the recession and to what we're going through right now. We've been thinking that retail fuel sales are probably the best picture to track how much we're moving around as residents in the economy, but as a picture not of traffic, but of how much activity is out on the streets. Are people still, mostly in their homes, or moving about more and more in commercial activity? And so you can see this trend line was down as much as 40%. The orange line is the Baton Rouge metro area vehicle fuel sales, auto fuel sales. And the blue line, the vendor that we receive this information from, sells outside of Metro Baton Rouge as well. So we want to track the overall state. You can see Louisiana and Baton Rouge have been trending more or less the same. What's really interesting is that dotted trend line that you'll see in the middle is almost back to zero, and it's been pretty steadily climbing. You can see between early June and now that it's been trending upwards to pre-pandemic levels. This is comparing last year to this year for each week, the same week, has now trended upwards to where we actually may hit in the next data set where we have gotten above zero. So we're actually at or above the amount of activity in vehicle fuel sales or overall economic activity that we were last year at this same time. So it's an interesting indicator of kind of the pace of activity out in the economy. And we think it's a positive story of what's happening. We also have seen in the same way that hotel occupancy data, which is on the left-hand side of the screen I'm looking at anyway, has been trending upwards pretty healthily. We're looking at an orange line here of 2020 hotel occupancy at about 53% today. And last year at the same week, it was about 64%. But you can see it's actually trended pretty closely since mid-June, where it's been holding steady. In the last couple of weeks, as the case volume, and we've been tracking the comparison between when there seems to be a spike in actual cases of COVID-19 in the metro area, that we do see some separation in some of these numbers again. That seems to be what's happened in the last 2 weeks of data. On the right-hand side, the weekly unemployment insurance claims. So this is a picture of how many people are in the Metro Baton Rouge area are claiming unemployment insurance and staying on it week to week. So we combine the initial claims each week with the combined claims to see what the picture is over the period of time. You can see we spiked up to 64,000 unemployment insurance claims that we're having in the metro area. It trended down to about 55,000 and has risen back up to about 58,000. We assume that has a lot to do with just a continuation of the pace of the length of this COVID-19 in our community, in our state. And as bar closures have happened, we think that number has trended upward a little bit again by about 3,000 jobs in the last few weeks. In terms of consumer spending, we think this is an interesting picture, and have been sharing this with our parish partners. You can see that overall activity of how much we are spending out at retail stores had gone down as much as 40% back in April. That number has now trended pretty well up to where we were pre-pandemic. You can see this chart looks like a heart monitor chart. You can go back to January to see how much we were spending in stores to how much we're spending today. In Ascension and Livingston, we're actually up over pre-pandemic levels. East Baton Rouge slightly below, but still has trended up pretty healthily and pretty steadily over that period. You can see a slight decline in East Baton Rouge as the cases have spiked and as folks have perhaps been a little bit more concerned about being out and about. We also assume, as I think we'll talk about a little bit more in this presentation, that the federal unemployment stimulus, that $600 per week, is buoying these numbers up somewhat. So it'll be interesting for us to know how much that's going to affect overall commercial activity should that program end without extension, and we'll go into that in a moment. We also have been able to track with some data that's gathered from a website called Opportunity Insights about small business revenue, and this chart shows you small businesses that have opened. So you can see in Ascension Parish, for example, nearly all small businesses are back open for that week. Now, that may not be factually true on the ground. This is a data set that we have from a lot of national suppliers of credit card information and expenditures that track small businesses that are open. East Baton Rouge, slightly down. It looks similar to what our consumer spending levels were. And then Livingston Parish, for some reason, having an anomaly experience compared to what they saw in consumer spending, has not seen as many of their small businesses that have opened. We also have noted, that perhaps no surprise, that small business revenue in our region seems to trend pretty closely to those that are open. So you'll see that in the next slide. We also wanted to ask ourselves, how is Baton Rouge's experience through this compared to some other metro areas roughly the same size as Baton Rouge? And so we got some information from Birmingham, and this is the county level data for their urban county. So one county snapshot. So East Baton Rouge the major counties for the rest of these metro areas. So Birmingham, Columbia, South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, Little Rock, Arkansas, and Louisville, Kentucky. You can see that this is the indicators of small businesses being open, which is the gray bar. And it shows this again in East Baton Rouge down about 8% on the left-hand side. Then the orange bar shows you small business revenue. And then the blue bar, we've kind of been showing you these slides in the prior slides, is consumer spending. What we found interesting here is that ours is about middle of the pack of compared to some other communities. As you can see, Louisville is having a much more significant decline in all three outcomes. Little Rock having a surge, if you want to compare it, 10% up over pre-pandemic levels for consumer spending. But they're the only ones seeing that kind of experience in their urban center. Nearly everybody else down. Only 2 in South Carolina showing that their small business revenue is up over pre-pandemic levels, which is surprising. But overall, we're about middle of the pack. So if you kind of imagine looking at Columbia, South Carolina, where their small businesses that are open is less than ours, their consumer spending is about normal to where they were, and their revenue is up. It's just they're the only one that seems to jump out as an anomaly here. And of course, you can see in Birmingham, their small business revenue is much more significantly down than compared to East Baton Rouge. So about middle of the pack. If there is no intervention, and we'll share a little bit more about this in a minute, in the federal unemployment insurance debates that are happening in Washington right now, our expectation is these blue lines for consumer spending are going to see some declines across the area. In terms of BRAC's work, in response to what we've been doing, we had a first phase, what we called our BRAC 1.0 COVID work. We've been focusing really significantly on getting information out on a daily basis, calling every investor that we have and major economic drivers in the metro area, working with our parish allies in each of our 9 parishes that we work in, to try to be in contact with those businesses to understand how their experience through this is going, and then additionally trying to create new initiatives like our BR Works website to be able to help folks find jobs as they're trying to re-enter the economy. So these 6 areas of work are what we're focusing on now, and probably through the next 4 months or so. Policy engagement related to federal and state initiatives to try to make sure we do everything we can to big back that unemployment rate. Today, Baton Rouge's unemployment rate is about 9% as of the most recent report, down a little bit lower than national unemployment levels, but still significantly higher than we were pre-pandemic. We're secondly focusing more and more on our economic activity, economic development work, looking at what opportunities might be new for the metro area or for the state to go after as COVID fades from view, hopefully sooner rather than later. We also are seeing business development activity, though fewer deal opportunities than we're seeing pre-pandemic. We still have economic activity going on and are doing a lot of virtual site visits with prospects that are trying to make decisions about their future. We're doing a lot to make sure that our information is available and readily accessible to the business community at brac.org/recovery, doing quite a bit of actionable intelligence and research, trying to help with presentations like this, but making sure that the data of the economy is available, and then targeted company requests to make sure that they can get information about their sectors. We're also wanting to make sure that we're cognizant that the recovery is different depending on the disparities in our economy. We want to make sure that we're making sure that the programs that are available also get out to Black-owned businesses or other ethnically owned businesses to make sure that they're being reached by everyone who needs to be able to have access to them. And then, of course, making sure that we're doing a lot to engage with our investors through this period to understand their specific experiences and how we can help them. I want to emphasize 2 major things that are, I think, important for businesses who are listening. Obviously, the PPP that everyone has gone after, the Paycheck Protection Program, has been a lifeline for those who have taken advantage of it. If a business has still not gone after a Paycheck Protection Program forgivable loan, we still strongly encourage those businesses to do so. If you have not gone after it and you want to ask a question of how to get introduced to somebody who can help you apply, we're happy to do that. The deadline is August 8th. So it's a little over a week away to be able to still take advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program money. And then most significantly today is the grand opening of the new Main Street Recovery Grant Program. This was a $15,000 grant that businesses in Louisiana, for-profit businesses in Louisiana, can apply for. Starting today, for the next 21 days, businesses who have not taken advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program or the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan from the SBA, if you have not done that for the next 21 days, you get first position in line to apply for those $15,000 grants. You do have to submit a significant number of receipts on eligible activities. Once you do that, you're going to be able to receive up to $15,000 per business, no matter what your situation has been. And then after, I think the date is August 18th, all businesses, whether you got Paycheck Protection Program or not, you'll be able to apply after August 18th. And so you can go to the website for the Louisiana Main Street Grant Program. There's louisianamainstreet.com and find out more to submit your information. Something that I think is going to be exciting for folks to go after. And if you want more information, there's quite a lot of information on the FAQ on their website. And we'll be putting out more information on ours. Something that we just released yesterday to try to emphasize availability of jobs is a report on our analysis of the posted jobs at our BR Works website at brac.org/recovery. We went through all the available jobs and tried to highlight which sectors and which specific job types are available, encouraging those who are looking for work, looking to get back into the economy, to go look at those opportunities and find out what's more likely to be open in what sectors and how to get yourself ready to go after those things. If there's anything else we want to be able to do, please do reach out to us and let us know. And Fred, happy to pass the mic back and take questions from you or the other panel.
Sure. Thank you, Adam. That's a sobering set of statistics, but it does look like there's some signs of hope there, I think. Next up is going to be our business editor, Bobby Lamb, and he's going to introduce our other three panelists, who I think should all start popping up on your screen in a moment. So, Bobby, once we get the other panelists going, you can start asking our questions, I think.
Okay. First, I'd like to introduce them. Terry Sterling is the CEO of her own healthcare management consulting firm, formerly Chief Operating Officer at LA Lake, and is co-chair of the Resilient Louisiana Commission. Jonathan Walker is a senior commercial sales and leasing executive with Meister Morrell. He's worked as a commercial real estate agent since 2005 and has been the lead presenter frequently at the annual Greater Baton Rouge Association of Realtors Trend Seminar. Connie Fabry is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Greater Baton Rouge Industry Alliance of more than 60 industrial facilities in the area. She serves on the board of the National Center for Construction Education and Research, is an advisory board member of LSU's Transportation Consortium of South Central States, and industry representative on Louisiana Board of Regents experimental program to stimulate competitive research. So I'll go ahead and start with you, Connie. What are you hearing from your membership about current conditions and the outlook for the future?
Okay, well, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I appreciate being included on this esteemed panel. So yes, I think it's pretty well known that we've had a slowed economy overall globally, and that has translated into slower running rates for some of our members and sectors. Especially hard hit have been the plants that sell into the automotive market, durable goods, and some export markets. I think we've all gained more respect, even more respect for first responders and healthcare, grocery store workers, but industry workers have also been out there every day during this pandemic going to work because they are considered critical infrastructure. And some of the examples where there are bright spots is that many of the products that are made at the plants are going into helping to fight the virus. For example, fuel for transportation, plastic sheeting for the healthcare gowns, plastics for the face masks and the shields, and hand sanitizer. Some of the plants have actually retooled and switched over to making those products. And but these are essential things to help us fight the virus. But we have a plant manager's quarterly economic forecast that we do, and the forecast for the first quarter and this, or the second quarter and the third, is very, very low. Typically, an indicator over the number 50 is an expanding economy, and the last result was a 22. So it's definitely a negative outlook. This is an outlook forecast. So they're very cautious, being asked to cut costs wherever they can, et cetera. Some construction projects have been canceled and or been slowed down, and but we know that the global population continues to grow. The demand for energy is growing, and the products of chemistry are growing. And so, there's a good example are lighter weight cars that are used in electric. I mean, that's just going to continue to grow. And the economics for investment here in the U.S. still remain very positive. If you look at the entire petrochemical global market, about a little over 50% of all petrochemicals are made in Asia. And the United States and Europe each have about 20%. The other 10 is like South America and the Middle East. And so for Louisiana to be competitive, to get more projects and to continue to have investment come here, it's just really important that we continue to have stable, predictable business environments and where businesses can make good decisions. One of the silver linings that I have seen is that maintenance and turnaround or shutdown work has continued. They have continued. Some plants put it on hold for a little while. Some, however, just went forward during the pandemic. And they've, of course, taken all the precautions. But we had just last week had a forum for the maintenance and turnaround folks, and we had a very large draw of interest. It was a pretty big seminar, our biggest yet this spring and summer. And so the plants are moving forward with that. That means investment is here. They want to continue to be here. They are running. And or they're a little bit running slower, and they're taking the opportunity to get some of this work done, which is really great news for our local economies, because that means people are going to work in the crafts and construction, as well as, of course, all the local suppliers of the products that are needed for turnaround, such as valves and just all kinds of supplies, including catering and everything, are able to then participate in those turnarounds. So that is a silver lining and a really some really good news, I think. We do have a very skilled workforce, and that is one of our selling points here locally. And as far as COVID trends, what we've been hearing, that is where most of our effort has been on getting folks together, benchmarking between the different plants, making sure that they're implementing things in the same way. But most of the plants did have pandemic plans already in place before this hit, so that helped to a degree. They were able to react very quickly. But of course, this COVID-19 one is pretty much like nothing we've ever seen. So it certainly was a shock to the system. Because they had worked on plans previously due to other viruses around the world, that was helpful. But definitely new safety measures have been put in place with social distancing and wearing masks, and new ways of working have been discovered with sending a lot of their folks home to work wherever possible, and meeting online and through virtual such as this. So that's been kind of interesting, and plants are finding out that maybe not all these people need to come into the plant, or they might have different rotating shifts. So some plants are making some of those changes. Some plants never laid anybody off. I never had to make changes. It just depended on the business. And so that's pretty much what we've been hearing. And as far as looking forward, I do am hopeful that things are continuing to improve. Again, that stable, predictable environment to make decisions and investments is important. And the low cost of natural gas and oil, it is bad for some parts of the membership, but also good for investment here. And so that will drive more chemical production in the United States and locally here in Louisiana.
Okay, thank you, Connie. Appreciate that. Go next to Terry Sterling. What's been the most serious financial effects of COVID-19 on hospitals, their revenues and such?
Thank you, Bobby, and for inviting me to join the panel, and welcome to our audience. COVID-19 is one of the most serious challenges to our healthcare system in the history of modern healthcare and medicine as it is today. As of yesterday, we had lost 3,674 of our citizens and had more than 100,000 individuals in our state who've been impacted by the virus. We are lucky in Baton Rouge that we really have a very tight, cohesive healthcare industry, and the hospitals in our regions really band together and use the Mayor's Healthy City platform in partnership with the governor's office to respond to the disease and really to try to stabilize in the midst of the surge. An important part of impacting the response was the governor's and mayor's financial support to the Baton Rouge General with funding for the Mid-City campus to provide what is today a surge facility for COVID-19 patients. On a more global scale, the American Hospital Association estimates that hospitals across the country lost $200 billion in the first 4 months of the pandemic. They estimate that an additional 120 billion may be lost by the end of the year. And certainly the hospitals and health systems in our city and state are included in that estimate. During the COVID-19 pandemic, you really had a unique situation where though you had an increase in sick volume, you lost a lot of your profitable surgical volume. And quite frankly, COVID care is very expensive. The costs were related to very expensive personal protective equipment, which the clinical staff goes through at a very high pace, trying to remain safe and to protect themselves, laboratory supplies for testing, pharmaceuticals, respiratory modalities, but most important, you can't take care of COVID patients without people. And the really intense nature of not only the routine salaries, but overtime and other costs that were associated with taking care of our citizens with COVID. As a result of the elected surgeries being deferred, your profitability was significantly impacted, but not only in the inpatient setting where those cases were deferred. In the initial response to COVID, many highly profitable surgery centers actually just closed. Ambulatory visits were converted to less profitable virtual visits, and really many of those visits were deferred as well. Lack of imaging, testing, and other things that drive growth in healthcare also were deferred. The financial burden to hospitals really was insurmountable, and without government intervention through the CARES Act, our hospitals really would not have been able to sustain themselves. And, Adam Knapp mentioned, our state looking for additional relief for unemployment. Our hospitals are hoping that there will be additional resources, financial resources, in the package that is coming from Congress. A worst case scenario for our healthcare industry is continued increase of unemployment, which means people have lost their jobs, which means they've lost their health insurance. And then without reimbursement from hospitals and help, you have, hospitals furloughing staff, delaying purchasing, shelving projects, and then really stalling any type of improvements. COVID-19, has clearly demonstrated the need for financially stable hospitals and for support in response to the community to remain healthy. But as with anything that is a challenge, there is also an opportunity to ask questions about how does this current financial crisis and health crisis in the pandemic help us think about transforming healthcare in the future? And I was reading this week some questions that were posed in a Kaiser article that really talked about, are we going to face more consolidation in healthcare, less competition in healthcare? How are we going to address, the public health funding? Public health funding was significantly diminished as we approach this pandemic. And so how do we begin to retool our public health infrastructure, not just for this pandemic, but for the future? How do we take care of the mental health needs, not only today, but there will be long-lasting mental health consequences for individuals who have been impacted by the pandemic. And then, lastly, really the question that the mayor and the governor has worked with his new COVID-19 health equity task force. The COVID pandemic really demonstrated the consequence of disparities and the cost of care when we don't take care of our individuals prior to them being sick. And so COVID-19 has, really been in the industry, but our healthcare systems and workers have really responded, and the financial support provided at the state and federal level is just critically important.
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate it. Jonathan, what's been the biggest impacts of COVID-19 on the commercial real estate market? And that's wide ranging. You got retail, offices, all kinds of stuff in that category.
Yeah, you're right, and thank you for having me. And good morning. It's affected pretty much all sectors of commercial real estate. There's really no sector that this pandemic hasn't affected. I can say the one that's gotten the most press that everybody reads about is of course the retail sector. Most of the headlines you read focus on the rise of e-commerce and just the lack of people getting out, like Adam mentioned. You've got the sales going down all across the board in the retail sector. People aren't going out and shopping as much. People aren't going to a gym as much. People aren't eating out. People aren't traveling. And so you've got kind of this two-edged sword of people kind of hoarding cash and holding on to what was in the past discretionary spending. And then you've got this rise of bankruptcies across the country in the retail world. I mean, big names too. This isn't the Sears that we all knew was coming, a few years ago. You're talking about, JCPenney and Stage and Neiman Marcus and J. Crew and GNC and Pier 1, and the list goes on and on. And if anybody's heard me talk in the past few years, I said, the tenants that had more of an omni-channel presence and an omni-channel strategy are the ones that are going to succeed. And that means not only do they have a brick and mortar presence, but they've also got an e-commerce strategy. And we've definitely seen that accelerated in the past few months. Jumping over to office, like you mentioned, Bobby, it's exactly what we're doing right now. It's multiple Zoom calls, usually with a dog barking in the background or a 3-year-old jumping on your lap while you're in front of a laptop asking what's for breakfast. But we've heard that a lot of people are going back into the office. Office strategy has been more of, hey, make sure you wash your hands, you social distance. If you're not feeling good, even if it's not symptomatic, like a fever or cough, if you're not feeling good, just please stay at home. We won't charge you a vacation day or a sick day even. And with office, the tenants that we've heard from and the tenants that we work with have really just put expansion and relocation on hold. And mainly it's because, those two things cost money. And when you're talking about office users, and I'm sure Adam can back me up here, is these tenants are looking at, in the future, 3 to 5 to 10 years at their future growth. And if they don't know what that future growth holds, whether it's from a business standpoint or, are we going to have more or less employees in the next few years, then they don't know what their office space needs are going to be like. One interesting debate out there is when office users do return, are they going to need more space because people want to social distance from their fellow employees, or are they going to need less space because people are staying at home doing Zoom calls, or maybe they don't need as many employees because business has gone down? So that'll be interesting to follow, whether office users are going to need more space or less space. Jumping over to the industrial market, also kind of one that's in a state of flux. With the rise of e-commerce, I think there's going to be continued demand for warehouse space, especially closer to what we call a last mile. When somebody makes an order, the faster that they can get that product, the better, as we all know. On the other hand, like Connie mentioned, you've got the lower price of oil, and you've got kind of plants that aren't growing as fast as they were pre-COVID. And so some of that warehouse space will probably become vacant or available for lease as these service companies kind of slow down. A bit of a bright spot and something that we would call as close to essential as you can get in commercial real estate is our multifamily market, which is the apartment building. I would consider it essential for somebody to have a place to live. The only concern there was what do the collections look like? Are owners of apartment complexes able to collect rent? And I think the short-term answer is yes, because the federal government has given folks stimulus checks and they've given them unemployment benefits. But long term, will those collections go down, as people return to work, or as the stimulus checks stop showing up? As brokers, I don't think anybody would consider us real estate agents as essential or frontline workers, but we have been working through the pandemic, albeit it's just a little bit of a different kind of work. We've gone through kind of our own phases, right? Phase one was everything we were working on was on hold. Nobody knew what they were going to do, one day from now, as opposed to, even 1 year, 3 years, 5 years from now. So everything from the selling side of shopping centers and office buildings to relocations and new business growth was put on hold. The second thing we did was we worked with landlords and tenants to work out some kind of rent relief. The good news for our local market, and you probably heard this, is the local banks that have worked with landlords and other owners of real estate have been very, very easy to work with. I've heard more positive stories than I have heard horror stories. And what we found, I could go in this for a long time, but I'll keep it short. What we found is that the willingness for a lender to work with an owner of commercial real estate, that has just trickled down to the tenant. So let's say the lender has told the owner of that piece of property that, hey, we'll give you 3 months of debt service relief. Well, then that has trickled down to the tenant by them getting about 3 months of rent relief. And there's different ways to tackle that with the tenants. We've seen landlords add term to the end of their leases. We've seen them say, hey, just let's catch up in January and you can make 12 equal installments to catch up on your rent. So we've actually seen a lot of positivity when it comes to landlord and tenant negotiations because, everybody has been affected by this. So there's nobody really pointing fingers that said, it's your fault that business is down. From the sales and investment side, it's just hard to sell a piece of real estate, especially income producing, where you don't know whether that office tenant or retail tenant is A, going to return to full rent, or B, is even going to come back at all. And so that has really, really slowed the investment stuff. And I'm talking about, a sale of an office building that has 3 to 5 tenants, or the sale of a shopping center that has 5 or 6 national retailers that may be struggling. That I think is going to have a little bit of a slower recovery. To try to end on a positive note, God blessed us with some beautiful weather in the heart of this pandemic, and so we were able to all get outside a little more. The 4-year-old got to learn how to ride a 2-wheel bike faster than his older brother and sister, so that was a blessing. And you see some light in the retail world and the office world as well. You've had grocery stores have had great sales, and they've got the ability to deliver groceries. You've had home improvement, big boxes, increased sales. You've got, any restaurant with a drive-through or a pickup window or the ability to put food in a food truck and show up to a neighborhood has had a lot of goodwill and good sales. And I think that, even we've heard in the headlines that, fitness may be doomed. I kind of take a different angle on the fitness side. From what I've heard, just reading publications and listening to a few podcasts, is the fitness industry has actually increased in membership during COVID. And it's because people realize that, we may be living with a virus or 2 or 3 over the next years of our lifetime. And so it's going to pay for people to be healthier and to worry about how they're treating their bodies. And I think that, in the long run, if fitness can figure out the distancing stuff and the sanitation issues, I think that fitness is going to be positive for the next few years. And lastly, like Connie mentioned, it's going to be a tenant's market in the next 12 to 24 months, I think. If you're a business or an office user that is considering relocating or opening up a business in a really good location, the landlord will be happy to take your phone call, because I believe that tenants are going to be running the show right now, and that can be on rental rate, it can be space needs, that can be location. So I do see it being a tenant's market in the commercial real estate market, at least in our woods.
All right, I got a question here. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate the your comments on real estate. That was a lot of good information about retail. Adam, I've got a question for you. And what is the main concern you're hearing from small businesses?
So it's been, Fred, a big challenge for small businesses, given the concern about consumer demand. And as you have kind of folks concerned about being out and about, that's affecting small businesses more than anything else. We actually have seen in the employment data that the small businesses have been the ones that have been the most affected in terms of revenue and impact compared to larger, mid-sized and larger businesses. And we think that on the retail side, that's going to be most significant about the confidence for the consumer to be out and about doing business. And you can see ebbs and flows of activity that tends to track COVID-19, positive case data. If you see that number trending downward as we did in May, you saw the rise in overall activity, and then it dipped back again a little bit in the last few weeks. Overall, though, if you look at the slides, what you'll see is a couple of months of just general trending upward of consumer activity at small businesses on the revenue side and on the businesses open data. It's trended up over the course of June and into July. So in general, it's been coming back, but still a lot of concern about consumers wanting to be out and about doing business. So I think if you want to come back to a singular message that we can all do to help small businesses right now is to practice, safe activity when you're out and about by wearing a mask when you go into a store. It's required statewide, but it also is a significant way to know that you're telling your fellow customers that you're going to be behaving safely, and that encourages more consumers to be out and about. So we think there's a lot that can be done just by demonstrating safety practices to keep the economy going.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question of Connie. It was good to hear what you were talking about with maintenance and turnarounds at plants, given that they're preserving cash, without new projects and so forth. Mostly they rely heavily on contract workers in addition to their own employees. What's happening with contract workers at plants? Or are they able to hold on to those workers?
So that's a good question. Thank you. So during the worst part of the pandemic in the early spring, late spring, there was probably about 20 to 30% of contract workforce was temporarily laid off. Although some plants did not have to do that. And a lot of it was due to construction projects being delayed due to the unknown. However, those seem to be picking back up, and they're rehiring. And I don't have a really good gauge on how far off we are still, but my sense is that plants have been slowly rehiring, and they're moving forward with their turnaround projects and so forth. So I'm sure it's not the same as it was pre-COVID-19, but I think things are on the upward trend for sure.
Terry, I got a question for you. Baton Rouge General has reopened its Mid-City Hospital, and the medical complex at Howell Place is being redeveloped with tenants including Ochsner Health. What has led to that slight resurgence of medical facilities in North Baton Rouge?
Thank you for that question. I think it's twofold. I think the impact of COVID that really looked at, there were three big factors that impacted individuals: ethnicity, poverty, and place. Where you live, what do you have access to? And this is really not a new conversation. When Mayor Broome was elected and she put together her transition team, and I was privileged to serve and join the group, that asset on Harding Boulevard was really identified as an important economic asset at a hospital that was shuttered. And just through, she and her team really worked diligently to bring that 76,000 square feet back into play in business. And not only to have Ochsner come in and provide primary care, but to have mental health coming into that building. Capillary Human Services, I understand, is going to be in that building. That is significant and huge. And then secondly, of course, the governor's Medicaid expansion and the funding there made the Mid-City campus possible. So you couple that with the funding that the governor and the mayor gave for that to be a COVID site, Medicaid expansion to provide access at Mid-City. And so when it gets down to it, it's about funding and it's about, investing in economic development. But there's work to do beyond just the access point. Regrettably in Louisiana, about 2 of our citizens make under $20 an hour. If you go to the Alice report and look at that individual, there's research that suggests only 10 to 20% of your healthcare outcome is related to access. And we have great hospitals, but it really is all of the other things that happen in your life regarding your living in poverty, you're not making a living wage, your educational attainment, your availability to clean air and clean water, the issues we have around food deserts. And so Louisiana really has to really think about how do we address poverty. We have urban and rural poverty. 1 in 5 Louisianians live in poverty. And so we really have to address a living wage. We really celebrated our essential workers, but many of our essential workers work without essential benefits. They work without sick leave, they work without healthcare benefits, and they oftentimes don't make a living wage, and they've been forward-facing in the pandemic. And so, really thankful to the mayor, the governor, Baton Rouge General and Auctioneer Oceans and others who have brought access. But there is more work to be done if we want to improve health outcomes in our city and in our state.
Okay, I'd kind of like to do a follow off of that question to Jonathan. What does a development like that and how we'll place a medical facility mean for further development of the area beyond that hospital?
Yeah, Bobby, I think that, retail is going to follow demand and retail is going to follow rooftops as well. And if people are moving to an area, then there's going to be a demand for services. And if there's a demand for services, then there's surely a demand for medical services. And like we've seen in the past with just retail in general, we've had a shift between selling, say, soft goods, clothing, to selling services. And that may mean an urgent care. That may mean boutique fitness. That may mean some kind of well-being / cryotherapy. But those tenants have really come out the last few years and filled the void that soft goods has left us. So I think, if there is growth in an area and there is a catalyst like the reopening of the hospital in that area, then other stuff will surely follow. I think it's just going to look, the retail is just going to look a little bit different than it would 5 to 10 years ago.
Adam, I got a question for you. This is actually from one of our online readers. The question is this: soon the unemployment with the stimulus will end. If the unemployment with the stimulus is not continued at the end of the month, how is Baton Rouge going to prepare to help so many families in need, help the many families in need and keep the Baton Rouge economy from crashing completely?
Well, it's the national economy too. I mean, this is not just one metro area. Remember, this is a program that's been the primary safety net for the whole country, as so many businesses have been impacted through this, as we showed in the data. The first thing I'll say is I think we all need to be calling our congressional leaders and encouraging them to get something done as quickly as possible. I think that there's a concern that the kind of the infighting between parties is going to make this a protracted debate and not get to a resolution. They've acted very quickly and collaboratively on the 2 earlier packages, and extending the date for PPP was done very quickly. So I think the encouragement to get folks together to try to find some common ground and get a resolution on the unemployment insurance debate, as well as what you heard from Terry Sterling about the need for hospitals, for state and local governments, and for additional business support resources to be provided. So I think that's a big part of this. If that is not done, what we've been trying to focus on is helping everybody that can find a path back to a job who is currently in that 58,000 claiming unemployment insurance in our metro area. And so how we can find ways to encourage them to either pursue short-term retraining and to pursue what jobs are out there and open, if there are new openings that are out there, to go out and look for them. We've been tracking and encouraging employers that are actually hiring right now to still post their open jobs at our BR Work site, so that those that are looking for work can go track those. And we've been posting and updating that data on a weekly basis. I think getting folks into what the jobs are that are available is going to be key. Knowing that there's going to be less jobs, we're going to be strained as an economy if we don't have some kind of extension. You've heard from businesses of concern about $600 on top of the $247 of state unemployment insurance has been a difficult, thing to compete with if you're at the lower end of the salary schedule or income schedule from an employer standpoint. However, some amount of extension is going to be necessary to get it back, and potentially some kind of go back to work bonus has been debated as a way to offset the negative impacts of the amount that had been paid. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. The debates of whether to do it at some lower percentage, back at $600, or varying it state by state based on the income levels of the state have been all part of these debates. And the biggest question is how quickly can they get to a resolution? There's also been a recognition that the PPP was a lifeline to small businesses, and that's something that's probably necessary to do again, probably more than anything, to make sure that retail and restaurants and consumer-facing small businesses who are still being impacted by capacity limitations of 25 or 50%, or full-out closures like is happening to bars, that some kind of additional financial assistance be available to those employers to get through this. And that kind of combats hopefully the unemployment rate issues that we're going to face.
I'd like to do a little follow on that, Adam. Basically what we've seen is the hardest hit sectors: leisure, hospitality, accommodations, the retail, construction. The jobs that y'all are seeing available, are these types of workers going to be able to fill those jobs? How much training can be required in that particular area?
Well, I think the jobs that are open right now are those at mid-sized and larger employers. That there's still obviously jobs that are open and smaller employers, but less new hiring. And so you have to kind of look across the industry sectors, and Jonathan named a few where you have some hiring going on, or folks that are moving or changing jobs, but you'll see job openings here and there that do pop open due to normal attrition. I think being actively out on the search is something that's necessary. We've also been encouraging with the mayor's office and our regional allies that do workforce training to make sure that those programs are focused as much as possible on short-term retraining opportunities. If you want to enter into a new opportunity, to look at something that you can do in perhaps a month or two or 6 to get you into a new career path, perhaps into the medical space if there are opportunities that it can be open, in healthcare, but knowing that you need to have to go retrain a little bit to go into some of those things. This can be a good time to re-enroll and pursue a degree that you had been wanting to get. You see a lot of folks that during a period of higher unemployment, they also decide this is the time to become an entrepreneur and start a business that you'd always been dreaming of starting. You tend to see higher rates of entrepreneurial activity in a downturn as folks reconsider what they're doing with their career. That's another thing that we're encouraging folks to go after, and programs like the Small Business Development Centers are a great place to start if you're trying to plan for a new path and how to get into a new business perhaps.
Got another question from our public. Given the experience with COVID, and this is for Terry, and I think it's asked in relation to perhaps the safety of hospital workers, do you foresee any permanent changes in how hospitals physically handle patients with infectious diseases?
I think when you go down the as-built environment and think about how we permanently treat respiratory diseases, I think there are going to be some design implications as it relates to that. I know that the Heart and Vascular Institute at Our Lady of the Lake was one of my last projects prior to the Children's Hospital. And we actually are working with Stantec, our architect, to publish some of the work that was done when we built, for example, the pediatric emergency room at the time that was a part of our trauma complex. We knew that we had aspirations to build a freestanding children's hospital, and so it was built very flexible. And so that area was very quickly able to be repurposed into a COVID adult area and separate to leave the main emergency room safe and to have a COVID piece. And so when we met with our lead architect and talked about publishing, it really comes down to flexibility. We sometimes over-design and over-engineer, and we really have areas and spaces that are really designed for one space. Many hospitals had already made accommodations for good hand washing. That good hand washing in hospitals is not a COVID-specific piece. That's just a good practice for all of us all the time. And so we had a clinical zone, a patient zone, a family zone. We had windows for individuals when maybe you can't have visitors, but sun can get in, and those components. And so I think many of the principles that are a part of that, will keep. Now, on the most problematic human side of the interaction that we really struggled with, and I hope we'll see some intervention around infectious diseases, we struggled with maintaining that personal impact. I can't imagine what it was like for a family member to lose a person to COVID and not be there. I am a big advocate of no one dies alone personally. And I know that, our workers have really struggled with how to make that more personal. How can technology help us with that? And so I think, the flexibility in the as-built is important. Fidelity to good infection control practices will be important. But I think we really need to think innovatively about the human side and how do we, in a future pandemic, make sure that the humanness of this doesn't get lost. And I know there's some smart, innovative young person who may be thinking about how to do that and how technology can help us.
I think we have probably time for just one more question. Bobby, you want to pick the final one?
Oh, let's see if we can make this one a quick one, I guess. Jonathan, we had talked to the Louisiana Restaurant Association earlier this week, and they're projecting the possibility of 25% of restaurants failing. What does that do to small strip centers and such around the city?
Yeah, that's a statewide and a nationwide problem, because as much as we like to eat and drink in Louisiana, to hear those statistics, 25% statewide and 40% in New Orleans, that's a staggering statistic. And as Adam mentioned, PPP is only going to get a restaurant so far. They still have to have people come in the doors and create sales for them to have, staying power. I think the biggest issue, Bobby, is really, have we created totally new habits in these 3 to 6 months that we've been living with this pandemic? Are people, working out in their home and walking outside more than going to a fitness center? The same can be said for restaurants. Are people cooking more at home as opposed to going to restaurants? Or are they doing an online ordering service where their dinner, 2 dinners per week show up at their doorstep? I think that's what the restaurant industry has to cope with. And I don't know if that's going to be a short-term or a long-term issue. I do think in Louisiana that eventually people will go out and go to restaurants as much as they did pre-COVID, but I don't see that happening in the next few months. So I think the biggest issue have habits changed and gone more to, we're going to either stay in, we're going to just pick up at a pickup window, or we're not going to go out at all. And that's tough for me to forecast.
Well, I think we're about out of time. I hope that when the Advocate holds its business outlook early next year, our annual business outlook, we'll all have better things to report. And I'd like to end by thanking all our panelists. I really appreciate y'all being on with us today. It's been very informative. And also, of course, thanks to all you who have tuned in. And finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Hancock Whitney Bank. So I hope everybody has a good day and stays dry. And again, thanks to our panelists for showing up today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.